Renting Price by State by Eric Heinemann. Housing is a basic need, but unfortunately, nothing is free in this world. In my project, my fundamental question was what are the differences between states and their rent prices? This research question matters, as in a world of ever increasing rent prices, renters need to know where the best state to live and rent are. Additionally, this allows renters to compare their rents or their future rents to the state average. The dataset contains cities with their average rent price across time periods. The dataset contains hundreds of US cities. The dataset contains all listing types. The dataset was additionally already purged of any outliers, only containing data from listings in the 35th to the 65th percentile for pricing on rents. This data was sourced from Zillow, one of the largest platforms connecting renters and landlords. According to their website, Zillow is the number one rental real estate app in the United States, four times more daily users than the next most popular real estate app. Today, the app boasts over 2.4 million active rental listings. The key variables were rent price, state and city, and time. Initially, I predicted that states such as California, Oregon, and other quote unquote West Coast cities would be the most expensive cities, with New York among them. I also figured that quote unquote southern states such as Alabama would be the least expensive. Data wrangling. The initial quality of the data was fairly great. Completeness getting the lowest score with a 2 out of 5, as there were frequently missing data points and often entire rows of data which was missing. Not great for analysis. But there still was a lot of great data. Accuracy scored a 4 out of 5. I believe that most of the data was accurate, but there was still some data that quite didn't seem right. Outliers were previously removed, but still there seemed to be some there. Timeliness scored a 5 out of 5. All the data was sourced from 2016 to 2025. Very recent and accurate data. Also, a great time period. Over a decade of data for us to work with. What a joy. Relevance scored a 4 out of 5. I enjoyed all the features, but wish there was a little bit more, such as income, but that would have made things much more difficult to analyze. So, with the factors and variables we were given, I think this was a great data set. Completeness was the main issue. A lot of data was missing. For techniques used, first, there was a lot of removal. There were some rows and columns which quite didn't have much data at all. So those data sets had to be tossed out. Then there was some imputation. Imputation is when data is created, but this data isn't just pulled out of nowhere. It is created using complicated algorithms to match the data that more or less should have been there. Imputation was used in many rows because almost none of the rows were perfect. So some imputation had to be used just to make sure that the data set could be useful. Lastly, a lot of duplicates had to be removed. Some of the data was duplicated, and obviously we cannot have that. So such had to be removed. After, wow, how great it became after. After all these techniques, completeness bumped up to a score of 4 out of 5, as the data was much more complete and useful. Accuracy remained the same at 4 out of 5, as the data set was very large and there was not much I could do to make the data set more accurate. Additionally, Airbnb already purged most of the outliers. So accuracy couldn't really have changed, and we had to have taken Airbnb, or I'm sorry, Zillow's word for it. Timeliness remains the same at a 5 out of 5. This is because the timeliness did not change, and the values for timeliness really weren't missing that much. Relevance remained the same at 4 to 5 as the data stayed the same, stayed as relevant, which was nice. And then primary question. So the primary question was which states were the most expensive and which states were the least expensive. For this, descriptive statistics was used, finding the mean of all the states and comparing them to one another. I imported the graph using MATLAB, which is a library, which is a very useful tool that can be used to make graphs much more easier. Finally, we had to create the variable, or the variable of states was already created, but we just had to put these variables into the descriptive statistics and make them work. After all this, it was much easier. We just had to pull from the top 5 and the bottom 5 states. Next, I looked at the average category at 2 categories, landlocked versus ocean access. Again, matplot library was used to create the graph. Then I used a list of landlocked states and coastal states. I then put all the states into either the variable landlocked or coastal. Then I found the mean of both categories. This was relatively simple as well. Next, we looked at regions of the United States. So Matplot once again was used to graph these. Then again, I found a list of states. Although these categories are somewhat vague, I used a reputable site. So this, I believe, is a very good indication of what most people believe these regions are. Next, these states were coupled into the variables, such as California being put in Western, etc., etc. Then the means were calculated and graphed. Then we have the k-mean clusters. So k-mean clusters means finding groups and putting them together. So we found a number of these k-mean clusters. For this, 3 worked out best. Then we calculated the mean for each cluster. Then matplot was used again to graph these. There were 3 clusters. Cluster 0 having 7 states, cluster 1 having 26 states, and cluster 2 having 17 states. And you can see the graph right there. Next, correlation was used. For this, we used the correl command in the Google Colab. Then we looked at price and time as our 2 variables. If something has a positive correlation, that means the 2 variables are very interlinked. If something has a negative correlation, that means they are not interlinked at all. Correlation goes from +1 to -1. The closer a correlation is to +1, the stronger the 2 variables are linked. The closer it is to -1, the less strongly these 2 variables are linked. Yeah, this begs the question, what really is the value in all this? Why did we do all this? So with the primary question, we can look at what states to avoid. So in here, you can see that you would not want to live in Connecticut, for example, or Vermont. And then this allows renters to also live in cheaper states. So I know this is not always possible, obviously, but say if you had an online job, you would want to live in one of the cheaper states to take advantage and maximize your income and save as much money as possible. Insight number 2. This was a very interesting observation because I had figured that coastal states would be much more expensive, but there was almost no variance. The 2 means were almost neck and neck. Very interesting. So with this, it was a very surprising result. As I would have figured, the ocean access would be much higher. But this basically means that there isn't really any value in avoiding these states at all. Next, we looked at the regions in the United States. This could target see what regions renters want to target. And here there was a very big variance with the Northeast and the West being very expensive and the South and the Midwest not being very expensive at all. So this was more of just an interesting insight to see from a curiosity standpoint. So if you want your money to go further, maybe live in the South, for instance. Then we have the Cayman clusters. This is very good for finding similar states and avoiding higher states. So say you wanted to work in California, or you do work in California, you could find a state in the next cluster that is nearby and possibly commute to that state, for instance. There are very many valuable insights that could be drawn from this as these states are coupled into categories. Next, we have the correlation. So this one's very interesting to me because it shows how the markets are changing. So many of your previous connotations and notions of these states may be changing. For instance, maybe you thought California would get cheaper when no, it's actually gotten much more expensive. And we can see that with many other states, such as Texas. Maybe you wanted to rent in Texas, thinking that it would be a great idea, when in reality, it's a very bad idea as prices have risen very much. That is my project. I hope that you have gained some valuable insights and have left with knowledgeable information that will have you learning more about the rental market.